Ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things we don't understand. If you do not put a cap on that fear in turn will escalate to hatred, because we hate those things that frighten us. If you don't cap that hatred, that will escalate to destruction, because we want to destroy those things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? They may have been harmless and we were just ignorant.
Sincere thanks.
Thank you for having me, I appreciate it.
On behalf of everybody that is here at the Center for Leadership Studies for, spending time with us. As I think you know, we do leadership training here. So
Right.
So much of what we talk about is going to be kind of focused in that realm. But I was certainly intrigued when we met for the first time about 2 hours ago about some of the things that you do internationally, your travels and some of the various places that you go to bring your message. So if you wouldn't mind starting there and just say, when you travel outside of our borders to talk with people, who are you talking to? What are you talking about? That sort of thing.
Well, basically, I talk a lot about conflict resolution. And in particular here domestically, my expertise is in race relations. And many of the countries which I visit to give some of these lectures, they have their own issues. Like, for example, I was in India recently, and they have what they call the caste system there. While it's not quite the same as what we have here, there are some similarities, but in terms of conflict resolution, the principles are still the same in bringing opposite parties to the same table to have a conversation rather than avoid each other and solve nothing. Before India, a few weeks before India, in fact, I was in Israel. The conflict there is between the Palestinians and the Jews. And I visited Palestinian groups, I visited Jewish groups, and I even visited a university where Palestinians, Jews, and Muslims all go to college together. So that was pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah. Is there a difference the way your message is perceived internationally than domestically? Is there anything that you can point to, or
Well, in some cases, internationally, some people are familiar with white supremacy here in our country. Some have heard the name Ku Klux Klan and know a little bit about it. Others, they've only heard it remotely and not really quite sure what they're all about, because they're so invested in their own issues. But the principles are still the same.
Okay. From all of the vast diversity or the spectrum of people that hear your message for a variety of different reasons, do you get any more resistance from one audience versus another? Like, if you think about the times you've been telling your story and people were resistant to it, is there any sort of similarity, if you will?
Oh, sure. Anytime you pioneer something, you're one of the first to get off the track of the status quo. You're always going to have your share of detractors. So I have my share, even some people who look like me, quite understand why I would sit down and talk with a white supremacist. That's just unheard of. You're catering to the enemy. Why would you even sit down with them? And then there are people who look like you, who think the same thing about me. But until they see it work, they have the aha moment. Oh, I get it. Now I see what he's doing.
Yeah, see where you're going with that? Okay. In terms of like investment in youth, let's say, like some of the programs that you're doing at high schools, colleges, do you find that age group in particular is really receptive to what you have to say versus maybe, again, people that look like me, sort of baby boomer, generational, kind of things? Like we're more set in our ways potentially, and there's we've lived a lot of years living a certain way. Is there any generational receptivity to your message?
Generationally, there are a lot of disconnects. When I speak to a lot of younger people, many of them, I think the KKK, that's something, they heard about in their grandparents' age. Is it still around? That kind of thing.
Powerful message, powerful challenge, powerful issue. But it really seems like the uniqueness of your response to that is the manner in which you approach it. It seems to me, outside looking in, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's, what you got to do is you got to understand that. You need to invest to understand where that is coming from and what's driving it, as opposed to just openly resisting it. Is that a fair assessment of?
Absolutely, and to take it a step further, anytime you're going to deal with opposition or something that is not equitable, or even it may be right. You go to a foreign country, they're not wrong, they're just culturally different than we are. And we cannot leave our country and go to a country, say in Europe or in Africa or Asia, and expect everybody over there to behave and do things the same way we do. That's their culture, we respect it. When they come, they respect our culture. But it's important that we learn as much as we can about the other person before going there. So A, we don't embarrass ourselves and make us look stupid or make our country look stupid. So now, convey that to what I do with white supremacists, black supremacists, neo-Nazis, KKK members and things like that. I have studied up on these people. Oftentimes, I know as much, if not more, about them and their organizations than they do. I've even had Klansmen call me up and ask me questions because they didn't know the answer about the Klan. Yeah. So while they may not like me, they respect me for my knowledge. You have to take a leadership role if you're going to try to persuade somebody or set an example that is influential. We only have one chance to make a good first impression. We may have a second or third chance to make a good impression, but one chance to make a good first impression. And most people will judge you on their first impression. And when you're trying to cultivate a relationship with someone, it usually takes more than one meeting.
Now, it seems like as you describe what you do, you're asking yourself, like, why don't more people do this? People that are really interested in solving some of the very sincere challenges that we have in the world, and it sounds like from your travels, it's not just confined to to our country. Obviously, it's all over the place. Your childhood and the ability to grow up, as I understand it, in different cultures and appreciate different cultures at a very early age. How did that help prepare you for what you eventually have become?
Indeed, it did prepare me, and unbeknownst to me, every time you go somewhere and see something different, it's in you. It's always there, and oftentimes you take it for granted. Now, my parents were U.S. Foreign Service, so I grew up as an American embassy brat. You get assigned to a country for 2 years, you come back home here to the States, you're here for a few months, maybe even a year, and then you get reassigned to another country abroad, and back and forth every 2 years. Today, I'm a professional musician, so I play all over this country, I play all over the world. Between traveling with my folks as a kid and traveling now as an adult professional musician, as of last week, I've now been in a total of 56 different countries on 6 continents. I've played in 49 of the 50 states, played or lectured. So I've been exposed to a multitude of cultures, ethnicities, colors, nationalities, religions, etc. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Mark Twain, and it's called Mark Twain's travel quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that's the God's honest truth. I would like to think if I had not had all those experiences that I would still be the same person I am today, love everybody, try to get everybody to get along, etc. But in all honesty, would I? Probably not. One time when we came home from overseas, it was 1968, and I was age 10. For the first time in my life, my parents sat me down and explained to me what racism was. Believe it or not, at the age of 10, I had never heard the word racism. I had no idea what they were talking about, because when I was overseas, my classes were filled with kids from Nigeria, Italy, Germany, France, China, Japan, Russia, Anybody who had an embassy in those countries, all of their kids, we all went to the same international school. So if you were to peep your head in my classroom doorway, you would say, oh, that looks like a United Nations of little kids, because that's exactly what it was, all right? The term that we use today to describe that scenario is multicultural, but that term did not exist back in the mid-60s. So while I was being quote unquote multicultural, my peers back home here were either going to all white schools or black and white schools if integration had evolved in those towns, okay? So when I would come back, I was either in an all black school or a black and white school, but not with the amount of diversity that we have today or that I had overseas. When I was overseas, I was literally living about 12 years ahead of my time, because that scenario had yet to come here. All right, so I was accustomed to diversity. It was nothing new to me. My 10-year-old mind could not get around the idea that someone who had never spoken to me, someone who had never seen me before, someone who knew absolutely nothing about me, would want to inflict pain upon me for no other reason than this, the color of my skin. It made no sense. So my parents had to be lying, because people don't do things like that. And I didn't believe them. Well, almost a month and a half later, on that same year, 1968, on April the 4th, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And then all hell broke loose all over this country, as you recall.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Nearby Boston, burned to the ground. My hometown, Chicago, Illinois, burned to the ground. Washington, D.C., New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles. Rioting, destruction, burning, all over skin color, race. So while I did not understand why people had such an issue with the color of someone's skin, it was then that I realized my parents had not lied to me, that there are certain people out there on both sides who have these issues. And then shortly thereafter, that fall, we moved back overseas on another assignment. And once again, I was around normalcy, people from all over getting along, okay? So I had formed a question in my mind at that age of 10. Question was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And for 50 years, I've been looking for the answer. And starting in my teenage years, and even through my adult years, I would buy every book I could find on black supremacy, on white supremacy, on anti-Semitism, on the Ku Klux Klan, on the Nazis in Germany, on the neo-Nazis over here. How does somebody acquire that ideology? I know you're not born with it, so where's it coming from? Where's it going? How can it be addressed? None of my books answered the question, how can you hate me when you don't know me? And then it dawned on me, to get the answer to your question that you've been looking for since age 10, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? Who better to ask than someone who would join an organization that has a whole history of hating people who do not look like them and who do not believe as they believe? Travel up north, travel down south, go to the Midwest, go to the West, and interview all kinds of different Klan people, and you'll have a book. That was my idea. There had been no book written on the Ku Klux Klan before mine by a black author. Mine was the first. There have been 2 books written by black authors that dealt with the Klan, but each one talked about how he escaped a lynching, one in the 1930s and one in the 1940s, but not from the perspective of sitting down face to face interviewing their would-be lynchers, right? All the other books were written by white authors. Obviously, you know, they had easier access to sit down without ramification and interview somebody like that, or they could join the Klan undercover, get the story, get out and write about it, or an ex-Klansman, ex-Klanswoman, you know, writing their memoirs. So I wanted to sit down face to face. So this guy named Roger Kelly was the Grand Dragon for the state of Maryland. And I wanted to meet him. I was gonna make him my first interview. I interviewed people all over the country. Some would talk to me, some would not talk to me, some wanted to fight me as soon as they saw me. Those who would talk to me, I would stay in contact with. Over time, Mr. Kelly began questioning his own ideology. Through our conversations, And one day he left the Klan. He called me and wrote me a letter saying that he was sorry for anything that he had done that ever offended me. He left the Klan, and he gave me his robe and hood. I now own that. I have a bunch of those things over time, but he no longer believes in that ideology anymore. I won't say I converted him, but I was the impetus for his conversion. He converted himself. But it came through conversation, just talking, listening to one another. I think in this country, we spend too much time talking about the other person, or talking at the other person, or talking past the other person. What I prefer to do is sit down and talk with the other person. And I have this theory that when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting, they're talking. They might be yelling and screaming and beating their fists on the table to make a point, but at least they're talking. They're not fighting. It's when the talking ceases, when the conversation ceases, that the ground becomes fertile for violence. So we want to keep the conversation going. If you spend 5 minutes with your worst enemy, you will find something in common. If you spend 10 minutes, you'll find even more. And if you begin to nurture those commonalities, you're building a relationship. If you nurture that relationship, you're building a friendship. How can you sit down with somebody face to face, like we're doing right now, and the person speaks the same language you do? That person wants the same things for his or her family that you want for yours. How can you hate them? Sitting there looking at them and learning all this about them. It's a little harder, Mm-hmm. So as you nurture that relationship, you're building a friendship. And then all those things that you had, you find even more commonalities. And all those things that you had in contrast, like which church you went to or synagogue or what pigmentation you have, begin to matter less and less.
When you got an invitation to come to a Klan rally, got to believe that's fairly unique.
Even more unique, I got an invitation last year, and I got one this year as well, to come speak to a Klan meeting.
Yeah,
I
this
spoke
is
to one
like,
last year
okay, so
in
I'm
Tennessee.
on camera freaking out here. It's just wild to me that you would be there and observe this, just really this kind of this tribute to hatred, I guess. What's going through your head? What are you thinking? Are people talking to you? How are they reacting to you in that setting, which to me, the whole motivation for that ritual has something to do with you in a very negative way. I mean, just that dynamic, if you
Right.
wouldn't mind spending a minute there, like.
Okay, well, here's the thing. You are a rational person. So it's in your nature to seek rationale. And you're looking for rationale behind a black man being invited to a Klan rally where they light up crosses on fire, which is reminiscent of terror.
Yeah.
And a reminder of bombing black churches and dragging people behind vehicles and hanging them from trees, etc. Yes, absolutely. All that baggage is there, okay? And that is reminiscent of that. But what you have to understand is this. Being a racist is irrational. It is irrational to hate someone because of the color of their skin. So you're looking for rationale where there is none. So if they're going to be irrational by joining these groups, they're also going to do other irrational stuff, like invite me to their rally.
Yeah.
Because they're irrational people, okay? But I'm glad that they invite me.
Sure.
I haven't had too much problem. Now, there are those who do not like me being there, and
Sure.
they get upset. But there is a chain of command. If the Grand Dragon or Imperial Wizard says, hands off, you leave him alone, you don't
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
against.
It's rational to me if you grow up in an environment that teaches and supports hate. Mm-hmm. It's rational that you would hate.
Right,
Okay.
in your mind, yeah.
It's like, this is my world and this
Right.
is what I've been exposed to and all of those sorts of things. So to me, it seems your message to leaders today, political leaders, leaders in organizations, whatever, it's investigate, find out, challenge your own beliefs, get out there. If you feel weird, about somebody or something, whatever it is, for whatever reason, lead, act on that, do something about it. Don't just sit here with your beliefs and sort of make enemies. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is fair, and I take it a few steps further. Ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things we don't understand. If you do not put a cap on that fear in turn will escalate to hatred, because we hate those things that frighten us. If you don't cap that hatred, that will escalate to destruction, because we want to destroy those things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? They may have been harmless and we were just ignorant. Now, we did see that exact thing that I'm talking about take place in Charlottesville, Virginia, where there was plenty of ignorance, plenty of fear, plenty of hatred. And what did it culminate in? Destruction, when a white supremacist got into a car and tried to murder as many people as he could by driving through the crowd of protesters. He ended up injuring 20 and murdering one girl, Heather Heyer. Ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, hatred breeds destruction. If you want to solve this issue, we need to stop addressing the symptoms. We need to stop addressing the hatred. Stop addressing the fear. Go to the source and fix the source. Address the ignorance. If you get rid of the ignorance, then there's nothing to fear, because you know it. You fear what you're ignorant of. Okay? You fix the ignorance, there won't be any fear. If there's no fear, there's nothing to hate. If there's nothing to hate, then there's something to destroy. So go to the source, fix the ignorance. And you fix ignorance with education. You bring enlightenment, and you alleviate the ignorance. Our society is only going to become, it only can become, one of two things. It can become what we let it become, or second, it can become what we make it.
What do we do about that? We like to end things because we're training people with, application challenges.
Sure.
So what do we do tomorrow, next week, next month, whatever, to sort of take a grassroots step in that?
I call it crossing the cafeteria. And let me explain that to you. In a lot of metropolitan cities, perhaps Raleigh-Durham, you have these companies, let's say, where people are working on a project together of all different backgrounds. They might even be sharing the same cubicle. And they get along, they work fine together. What happens at 12 noon? They all go downstairs to the cafeteria, and blacks sit with blacks, whites sit with whites, Hispanics sit with Hispanics. Are they racist? No, not necessarily. But they tend to self-segregate because people tend to feel more comfortable around somebody who looks like them or shares their culture or speaks the same language. So that does not necessarily make them racist, all right? But if you go a couple steps beyond that, where you think you're better than those people, then you're crossing that line and it gets into a gray area. But what I say is this: everybody has something to offer, everybody has something to learn. So next time, walk across the cafeteria and sit with someone who does not look like you, who does not share your culture or your religion, and have lunch with them.
Yeah.
So you know what? I know a guy who's a white supremacist. He lives over there. Let's invite him to one of our Wednesday meetings. Oh, no, we can't have him over here. He hates us. I don't want him in the same room with, I don't even want to sit down at the same table. I don't even want to be in the same town as him. Well, that's the wrong approach. We need to invite that person to our meeting and give them a platform. Allow them to express their views, okay? We don't have to believe their views, but give them a platform to express them. And if we agree with them, fine. If we don't agree with them, that's fine too. We challenge them. We say, look, I need a little more clarification as to why you think I should believe the way you do. Give me more explanation. And when you do things like that, there is an excellent chance that they will reciprocate and give you a platform. You make sure that you have done your homework so that you can present your platform in a factual, intelligent, and influential manner. Because at the end of the day, you each have to think about what the other person said. And if somebody says something to you that goes against, what you have believed from day one to however old you may be today, but you think, she does have a point there. If someone is inundated with this ideology and they've had it from day one or however long, it's going to take a while, but you have to nurture that. You cannot shut them down. When you suppress that ideology or that speech, the free speech, it's going to fester, it's going to explode. You want to let it come out and hear it, because how do you figure out how to address something unless you know what it is? Mm-hmm. So there's no skin off your back to listen to some lines of hate and this, that, and the other. You know who you are. They can't define you.
How many robes do you have?
I have probably 44, 45 right now.
44 or 45?
But about a little over 200 people have left different groups for which I've been the impetus for. Wow. I have other things besides robes. I have Klan belt buckles, swastika flags, and different things.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I am struggling to remember a time this short where I've learned as much or valued as much as your time talking to us. This will not do it justice, but
thank you.
Sincere thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Sincere thanks
Appreciate it.
for this opportunity, and there is much to think about and much to do here. So thank you for a lifetime of contribution
Well, thank you
to
for giving me the opportunity to share.
The world's toughest problems.